Good morning, it's the 7th of June, it's about 7:30 in the morning. What a cracking morning, just up here on Ventnor Downs, south coast of the Isle of Wight. Just going to have a quick walk along this way, along the edge of the radar station, right into the sun. I apologise for that. Let's see if there's much about. So what day is it today? It's a Friday, so yeah, another day going to be spent down in Ventnor. I might try and get further afield today. Yeah, so maybe I can get out of Ventnor. So either do that, go and do a video somewhere else on the island, or do some writing. I'll have to decide that. It's a beautiful day and the breeze has dropped right off, so it is more of a video creation morning than a writing morning. There's a nice foxglove in flower there. So I probably will go and do a video. Where would I go though, I wonder? Let's have a think about that. But before we do, let's just have a walk along the edge of the radar station. Do love this spot. It's great for bird migration earlier in the year. It's getting a bit late now. Still time for something like a bee eater maybe. It's that kind of time of year. First, second week of June. Just at the end of the first week of June, aren't we, the 7th? And these fence lines and these bits of scattered scrub look ideal for a red-backed shrike or something, or a common rose finch maybe. These are all rares that I've never actually, well, I've had bee eaters. I've yet to find a red-backed shrike up on Ventnor Downs, and I've yet to find a common rose finch anywhere in the undercliff. But it's all good habitat. Maybe a windchat, that would be nice. Far more common, obviously, as a migrant. In southern England, windchats used to be really common as a nesting species in this kind of habitat. Not to be confused with stone chats, which are still nesting here. But windchats have declined dramatically in a kind of approaching extinction as an English breeding bird now. There's a few in the uplands still, and a few on Salisbury Plain Training Area, which is a bit of a hot spot for them still, but they've basically vanished from everywhere else. So, but you still get them migrating through places like this. Getting a bit late for that now, even for windchats. The sky is beautifully clear. Honey buzzard might be another possibility. So it's still time for a honey buzzard migrating through. You get them in the New Forest and they migrate through the island every year. I tend to see them in the autumn, in September, more than in the spring. So they migrate in, they obviously go down to Africa for the winter. And they migrate in around about now, well, last few weeks, and then they leave again. They breed obviously in southern England, and they migrate off again south in the autumn. Lots of foxglove in amongst the gorse and brambles. What's that, an elder, the taller thing? Skylarks singing beautifully. Because I'm looking into the sun and I don't know how to control the settings on this. It's a bit, is it underexposed or overexposed? Underexposed, I guess. A bit dark when I point the camera towards the sun. Need to learn how to manually adjust the settings. So if I point it this way, it'll darken up. You can tell I don't know anything about video content creation. In the sense of I'm no more advanced than just turning the thing on and hoping for the best. But I will be up in my game. Especially now I've got this really nice little Osmo, DJI Osmo Pocket 3. It's a lovely little camera. Lovely thistles, soon to come into flower. The old bees will love that. So I can hear meadow pipits and skylarks singing. Linnets just flown over. So the one missing component from this kind of landscape, thinking about it from a rewilding point of view, this is obviously a car life channel, not a rewilding channel, but anyway, the one missing element, missing species, is wild boar. And the reason that came to mind as I'm walking along here is because of the linnets. So the relationship between the two is, so linnets are an obligate seed eater, meaning they don't eat invertebrates, unlike just about everyone else, the little passerines, they're all eating invertebrates. Linnets are an obligate seed eater, which means they only eat seeds. And they really like annual wildflower seeds, annuals that germinate every year. And those annual wildflowers, which the linnets need, because they're annuals, they need disturbed ground. And what creates disturbed ground? Wild boar. So wild boar obviously go rooting around looking for tubers and roots in the soil, and then these grassy sort of swards. And by disturbing the ground, they provide a habitat for, you can hear the linnets, it's behind me. They provide the habitat for annual wildflowers, and those annual wildflowers, lovely linnet singing there. Those annual wildflowers obviously set seed, and the linnets come down and eat the seed. So you have a whole relationship there between wild boar, annual wildflowers and linnets. So the missing element in this particular landscape is the wild boar. We do have rabbits, so they create scrapings like this one here. And there's a cattle scraping just over there where the ground has been disturbed and where the annual wildflowers can germinate. But we're missing wild boar. If we had wild boar, we'd probably have a lot more linnets, because we'd have a lot more annual wildflowers. There is a book, what's the lady's name? It's called Groundbreaker, or Groundbreakers, I think. Chantal Lyons, that's her name. She's written a book all about wild boar in the UK, of which there are very few left. They're a native, wild pig species basically. And we drove them to virtual extinction. There's a few left. Well, a few have been escaped from various places or been reintroduced. But read that book, Groundbreakers, by Chantal Lyons. If I remember, I'll put a link to it in the description to this video. But it's a wonderful account of the history of wild boar in the country, and they're still common elsewhere in Europe, but our wonderful gamekeepers managed to wipe them out virtually in the UK, sadly. But that book is a really good account of their kind of natural history and why they're ecologically so important if you're a species like a linnet or a turtle dove, come to think of it. So yeah, we need to champion wild boar. Anyway, this isn't anything to do with van life, is it? Just at the radar station now, Ventnor radar station. One of these days I'll find a gap in the fence and I'll sneak in there and break in and have a wander around the grounds. Here are the cattle using the cars as a rubbing post. It's one of the reasons I don't normally park up here overnight these days. It's because the cows come along and start rubbing up against the car early in the morning. That's what they're doing here. If this ever happens, if you're ever parked up here or anywhere with cattle and they come up and start rubbing on your vehicle, which they will do. Hello, buddy. If they do this, and if you know the cows well enough, which I do, hello, just walk up to them. They're very inquisitive. I don't think it's going to let me stroke him. But I'm not going to startle them here, but if you flap your arms at them, they'll all run off. Go on, buddy. I'll just shoo them away. Go on. I don't want them running too wildly with these posts around, they might injure themselves. Go on. Gives me an opportunity to talk about aurochs. So aurochs is obviously the wild version of these guys. So these guys were bred by humans back in the day from wild boar. So they've all got, sorry, wild aurochs, wild cattle, European wild cattle called aurochs. Humans tamed a few aurochs and bred them over the centuries, and this is what we created, cattle like these. Aurochs we managed to make completely globally extinct, good old humans. And they're ecologically really important, one reason being this stuff, cowpats. There's a nice cowpat there. So there's lots and lots of invertebrates that are adapted to recycle waste. Cowpats, so dung beetles is the obvious example, and because wild aurochs are now globally extinct, unlike wild bison, European bison we've still got, so we used to have European bison and aurochs, both wild species, aurochs being wild cattle, European bison being a bovid. We've still got European bison, so they're being reintroduced across Europe through conservation breeding and translocation projects. But unfortunately, the wild cattle, aurochs, are globally extinct, so we can't do that. So what organisations like the National Trust do instead is they use these guys, their ancestors, their kind of almost cultivated, bred, domesticated replacements for wild aurochs. And you'd say, well, why bother? Aurochs are extinct, so why bother having cattle instead of those wild aurochs? It's because of all the ecological roles that aurochs used to play in the landscape, which they can't anymore because they're globally extinct. One of those roles being dung, and all the invertebrates that are evolved, adapted, dependent on cattle dung, like various species of dung beetle and various other invertebrates that live on dung and recycle it. And the thing is that there's obviously other species that eat those beetles. So one being redback shrike, which I've spoken about before on some of my videos on this channel because I'm obsessed by them. But redback shrike love this kind of habitat, but they need dung beetles, or they need beetles, and one group of beetles they're particularly fond of, they're inordinately fond of, to misquote Haldane, I think it is dung beetles. So redback shrikes love to feed on dung beetles, and they love to give dung beetles to their youngsters. There's some fledged linnets over there. They love to give dung beetles to their youngsters, and because there are no aurochs left, those linnets, which just flew off, are on the bare ground here feeding on seeds. Because there's no aurochs left and therefore no wild cattle dung, the dung beetle population is in trouble, potentially. But we've got lots of domesticated cattle, obviously, and cattle dung would be just as good as aurochs dung for dung beetles if it wasn't laced with poison, which it is, unfortunately. What's this orchid down here? Now is this a burnt tip, or is it pyramidal, or is it something else? Let's have a closer inspection. Not sure. No, it's not a burnt tip. If there's any botanists, comment in the comments section and tell me what sort of orchid that is. Could just be a pyramidal. Yeah, so the cattle dung we do have from these domestic cattle is laced with chemical poisons, anti-worming, I forget what it's called now. Anyway, the farmers give them these chemicals to kill insects in their guts, and those chemicals remain in the dung, and when they poop them out, create cowpats. Any invertebrate, like a dung beetle that tries to lay its eggs in the dung, obviously the eggs just perish because it's laced with chemicals that are designed to kill invertebrates. So that's not good, because then nothing hatches out of the dung and redback shrikes don't have any food to eat. So what the National Trust, well, they don't do it here, they're supposed to do it. They're supposed to ensure that the cattle dung isn't laced with those sorts of poison by making sure the cattle, well, there's a swift, that's a migrant swift going through. Yeah, you can make sure the cattle that go on places like this, which is essentially a nature reserve, you can make sure those cattle haven't been recently laced with chemicals, and therefore the dung they're pooping out is clean of chemicals and safe for things like dung beetles. But we know the National Trust doesn't enforce that here, because the dung just sits there for months without rotting away or without being consumed by invertebrates, which means it's got poisons in it, poison chemicals. So I doubt the National Trust will watch this video, but slap on the wrist if you do, because I know it's your policy that you don't allow those chemicals in cattle that graze on your land, but the grazier you're using certainly does use those chemicals. Ah, dear. Right, swift is nice, not seen any other migrants. Yeah, so having cattle in a landscape like this is really important from a wildlife point of view. It would be even better if the dung was clean. But they also browse off some of the shrubby species, the brambles and gorse to some extent. So they keep it open as a grassy plain with scattered shrubs, which is really, really good habitat for things like linnets and stone chats, meadow pipits and skylarks on the open grassy bits. And this mosaic structure you've got here is just superb for all sorts of wildlife. So 9 out of 10 to the National Trust in terms of how this place is managed. They lost a point because of the avermectins, the chemicals in the cattle dung. Those cattle are following me now. So a whole herd. Imagine back in the day, early Holocene, where there would have been, well, actually 600 years ago, when there would have been cattle, herds of wild cattle. Go onto Google and Google Banteng, B-A-N-T-E-N-G, is that right? Or Gaur, G-A-U-R, and they're wild cattle that still survive in the wild in Southeast Asia, in, you know, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia. So Gaur and Banteng, look at those on Google, look at Google Images, and you'll see what our wild cattle used to look like before we domesticated them and drove the wild version to extinction and replaced them with feeble domestic ones. They were huge, basically, and you certainly wouldn't walk up to one like I did with that lot there. Lovely skylarks singing. Hopefully you can hear that. Plans for today, so I'm torn. It's one of those days where I'm torn between writing and video creation. I think I'm going to do video creation because, as I said earlier, the weather's rather nice. I'm thinking of creating some mugs for my lovely viewers to purchase, maybe. So I can easily put images on mugs of Ventnor and wildlife and see if anyone wants to buy them. I've got a logo for my channel which I've never really used, which I might stick on a mug as well. Yeah, tell me in the comments section whether you would be interested in that kind of thing. I'm assuming most people wouldn't, but one or two of you might be. Another little side hustle maybe. There's a what are you sat on there? I'm assuming you're carrying crows with binoculars. Yes you are. What's that little bird up there? Skylark. Right, head back to the van now, and quite keen on having a coffee. There's a bit of free down by my car, which is, I'm going to use that to start to build out the bed frame properly in the car. Just one of the guys that lives down in the bay gave that to me, so it's going to be really useful. I'm going to use that as the legs. Saw it down into, I've got two of them, saw them down into leg length to hold up the slab of wood that goes over where the passenger seat was. To hold it up properly. At the moment it's just resting on a few of my books, my remaining books, the bed. So I'm going to build it properly, probably this or over the next week or so. So I hope you're enjoying this video about Ventnor and the Undercliff. If so, then don't forget there are two books I've written. One, Bird Watching Around Ventnor, creatively named, and the second one is Wildlife Watching Around Ventnor. Just short books about the local area that are the subject of this video. Available on Amazon. I'll put a link below for this video, and you can also order it from the library, and it's available in all major bookshops, both of these little booklets, and in a few shops along the Esplanade, like the Longshoremen's Museum and Lady Scarlett's Tea Room as well. But yeah, I'll put a link to the description if you want a slightly deeper dive into the Isle of Wight Undercliff. Then these two little booklets might be of interest to you. Just go onto Amazon otherwise and just search for Steve Jones and Ventnor and you should find them.